all the goodies, coffee, and I see a lot of Danishes back there, so thank you very much for your hospitality today. So let's talk a little bit about budgets, okay, one of my favorite topics. 4 key things I want to talk about. So I'll give you a quick overview of where we stand so far this fiscal year. Give you an overview of what's being proposed for the operating and capital budgets for the upcoming fiscal year. And then I'll give you a little report on where we stand with our reserve replacement fund, or what we usually just refer to as our reserves. So this is a little hard to see here, but I'll kind of touch on the key points. When we put the budget together for this fiscal year, we were estimating about a $1,600 surplus after covering all of our operating expenses and moving amounts to our reserve fund. However, for the 8 months ended February 28th, 2019, we're running a small deficit this year. So our revenues are right where they need to be. We've covered all of our operating expenses, but after making the transfers to our reserves, we're showing about a $50,000 deficit. Now, the reason for that is primarily due to 2 things. Snow removal, and as many of you know, we had a lot of ice this year. So an ice costs money to treat. So our salt expenses and our shoveling costs are much higher than we had budgeted for and much higher than we have anticipated in the past. Additionally, we're also incurred a lot of additional professional fees this year, primarily legal fees. As you know, Hidden Valley Utility Services proposed a rate increase. The foundation joined the case to oppose that. Probably know there was a final ruling in that, and our water and sewage rates are going to go up, but I'm pleased to say I think we got a much lower rate increase than what the utility company asked for, and that was due largely, I think, due to the Office of Consumer Advocate and our attorney's efforts in helping to defeat that, or at least get it to be lower than what it was initially proposed to be. So for the whole year, I'm anticipating we're probably going to show about a $30,000 deficit. And this is the first time that's happened in a number of years. The good news is, though, we have enough money in our operating funds and in our reserves that we can easily absorb that. In terms of our capital budget, so these are the long-term items, things that we're repairing and fixing around the community. We had a budget of $735,000 for the year, and a lot of work is being done and will be done up through June 30th. And I anticipate we'll probably spend about $710,000 in total. And by June 30th, our reserve fund, after paying for all those projects, we should still have about $1.8 million in our reserve fund. So we're in very good, sound financial shape. No problems, no major debt, good, sound investment base. So I don't see any issues going forward. How do we develop the budget? Well, it's a lengthy process. We actually start back in the early part of 2019. So in January and February, we start to collect a lot of information. On April 11th, I met with the Finance Committee, and I presented both a draft of the operating budget and the capital budget. And they asked a lot of tough questions. In response to their review, I went back through, made some changes, some edits, cleaned up some of the calculations, added some calculations at their request. And then on April 18th, I presented that budget to the board. We do what's called a board budget workshop so that the board can ask questions about it. So we went through that process. Today is our public meeting to present it to you and answer any questions that you might have. And then on May 17th at our May board meeting, that's when I'll present the budget formally to the board and ask them to approve it. So here's what the budget for next year will look like. Our projected revenues about almost $2.6 million. Our projected expenses about $2.1 million. And that'll leave us with revenues in excess of expenses of around $444,000, of which we'll take that and transfer most of that over into our reserves. I'll talk a little bit about how we come up with that number a little bit later on. And that'll leave us with a small bottom line, about $10.5. So we usually budget to be about break even or to have a little bit of a surplus. So what are some of the key assumptions in this year's budget? So first of all, the good news is that the budget assumes all of our existing amenities will be maintained. We're not getting rid of anything. So all of our pools, roads, walking paths, ponds, etc., everything we are budgeting to continue to maintain all of those. We will need a small assessment increase this year. So the budget contemplates a $2 per month assessment increase for all units across the community. And this would be the first assessment increase since July 1st of 2016, so the first time in 3 years. We use a zero-based budgeting approach. So what that means is when I build the budget, I try to get down to the ground level and build it up. And I don't take last year's numbers and just increase it by a percentage. I really take a hard look at all of our expenses and try to project them out. We will continue to follow the recommended funding from our reserve study, which tells us how much money we should put away each month. And our capital expenditures in the capital budget will follow the reserve study. Plus, there are things that need to be done around the community that are not in the reserve study. So we'll continue to work on some of those as well. So, where does our money come from? Right, at the revenue level, as you might imagine, assessments, what you and I pay in, that's the principal source of our revenue. So of that total $2.5 million, $2.4 million or 94% of that comes from you and me, right, our assessments. The other 6%, or about $150,000, comes from a variety of sources, including we get some advertising income from our directory and on the website. We charge some late fees for folks who pay late, etc. We're proposing that increase of $2 a month increase in assessments due to really two things. The snow removal experience that we had this year, based on all of the information that we've been able to gather. Many of you know John Cups, who couldn't be here today, but who kind of serves as our resident meteorologist up here, consulting with him. And he has talked with the National Weather Service about what to kind of expect in terms of weather patterns. And I think that we're probably going to continue to see that level of ice, and that's going to require salt and shoveling actions to be able to counter that. So we're going to have to budget for that. Additionally, we're going to see our labor costs go up a little bit, and our utility expenses continue to go up, especially our electric costs, and of course, as you know, our Hidden Valley Utility Services, we're going to see a water and sewage increase as well. So one of the other income items that we do have, right, in addition to the late fees and advertising, whenever a new homeowner moves into the community, we do ask them for an upfront payment. It's a one-time entrance fee, and that's $500. We implemented that 3 years ago, I think, and that's been a nice source of revenue for us. So in the most recent fiscal year, it generated about $26.5 in revenues, and we're budgeting for next fiscal year that it'll generate about $27.5. If you're an existing homeowner and you sell your home and buy another home, we are exempt from that. We don't charge you for that. Okay, so where does the money go? All right, so we said $2.5 million in change in revenues, $2.1 million in expenses, and you can see there are 6 categories, right, that constitute almost 80% of our budget. So, of course, our labor, the related payroll taxes and benefits are the largest one, 28%. We then have our grounds maintenance, which I'll talk to you about in a moment. Snow removal comes in at 3rd, and then security, utilities, and professional fees. This relationship hasn't changed much. In the time that I've been treasurer, those top 5 categories have always been the top 5 categories, and they don't change much as a percentage. And then the remaining 20-some percent, about $440,000, is everything else, and it's a whole bunch of really small items that aggregates up to that $400,000. So you might be wondering, what do we do to control expenses? Right? So there are several steps that we take as the foundation to try to really monitor our expenses very carefully. First of all, our policies require us to get bids on things, anything over $5,000, but I can tell you that the office staff, usually anything over $1,000, we're checking prices. Right? We're trying to get a better price on it. We use the budget. Okay? Chris in the office can attest to you that if I see something, an expense that comes through and I don't know what it is, right, I'm asking about it. So we do monitor that budget very carefully. We're always looking at, can we do things in-house or should we continue to outsource things, right? Snow plowing is probably a great example of that. Over the last couple of years, we've taken more snow plowing in-house, and that has helped us. We have a very lean staff. There are 8 people that work at the foundation. There are 4 people administrative and 4 maintenance folks to cover 1,080-some units here at the mountain. We do watch all those vendor contracts very carefully to make sure that the vendor's providing, and if there's any changes in those contracts, that we're made aware of it immediately. We also have really moved, I think, and continue to work on preventive maintenance. The maintenance committee watches this very carefully, as does the finance committee. And lastly, we've had a lot of success with multi-year contracts. Most vendors don't want to come up to Hidden Valley for just 1 year at a time. So by using 2- and 3-year contracts, it's been very effective in helping to control our costs. So I'm going to take you through kind of those top 5 categories of expense and just tell you a little bit about those. The largest one, of course, labor, payroll, taxes, and benefits. So almost $600,000, 28% of our total expenses. So as I mentioned, 4 administrative folks and 4 maintenance people. The budget does not contemplate adding any new staffing, all right, or reducing it, all right, just maintaining where we are right now. We also budget for, of course, seasonal labor for the pools, our lifeguards to operate the snack shack, etc. And we've built in a 2.5% wage increase for the full-time staff. Our pool, okay, the pool labor contemplates that both the pools will be staffed by lifeguards throughout the season. The finance committee goes through and challenges this every year, but over the last several years we've received 2 legal opinions telling us that it makes sense that we should have lifeguards at the pool, but we do not want to go without lifeguards. So while it does cost us some money, there's about $70,000 in the budget for lifeguards. You don't want to have an incident where you have an accident, someone is seriously injured or worse, the liability payout would be catastrophic. We also, when I build that budget, I also do try to factor in some rain days because we know we won't be open every day. There are some times when we have to send some people home, so we build that into the budget. And then lastly, in terms of benefits, our staff here work for the management company, First Service Residential. So their benefits get passed through to us and we reimburse the management company. Currently, that includes health insurance, dental insurance, some life insurance, etc. And the cost-sharing relationship is that we, the foundation, pay 70% and the employees pay 30%. Now last year, we had budgeted for a health insurance increase of 10%. We were pretty close. The actual increase came through at 11%, and that was in January. For fiscal 20, I'm budgeting a 9% increase in health insurance and then 5% for the other types of insurances. I should also note that when you compare this year's budget to last year's for health insurance, you'll see that it actually went down, and you might wonder why is that? Well, there are actually a couple of members of the maintenance staff that have opted out. Right? They are not covered by the First Service plan, so they've either decided to not insure or relying on spouses' health insurance. Grounds maintenance is our next biggest category, so about $400,000, almost 20% of the budget. And what does that include? Well, that includes all the grass cutting, fertilization, the spring and fall cleanup, tree trimming, etc. You've probably seen our landscapers are out on property, and you've probably also noticed that we have a new landscaper this year. Right? So after many years of using Lichtenfels, we went through a competitive bidding process. We put out, there were 5 firms requested to bid. 3 of those firms did bid. We went through those in detail. And in March, the board awarded that contract to JML Landscaping. So those are the trucks you're going to see around. We're very positive about that decision, and we think they're going to do a great job for us. Snow removal. This is the one that, as your treasurer, keeps me up at night. Because it's incredibly hard to predict. I have no idea. It's my best guess. I'm going to show you a little bit of the thought process that we went through to try to come up with this number. So we're budgeting for fiscal 20, $260,000. So I'm increasing the snow removal budget by $20,000. It was $240,000. So what does that include? That includes all the salt that we buy. That includes having the vendor come out and assist our guys with plowing when needed. And then probably the most expensive thing that you might not think of is when we have to, as the office staff refers to it, shoveling the mountain. So when we call the vendor, they come out and are shoveling the walkways and the steps, etc., in accordance with our snow removal policy. This year, we've spent about $295,000 on snow removal altogether. The ice was brutal. In fact, we got to the point where us and other communities depleted the salt supply, so we weren't able to get any additional salt from our supplier, and we had to go out and get some additional. And we use Cargill, which if you know anything about salt, they're like the largest supplier of salt, and we are a preferred customer because we've been with them for so many years, but in mid-March we got shut off because they just didn't have enough supply. Breaking that budget down for fiscal 20, 30,000 of the 260 is for plowing, 95,000 for shoveling, 130,000 for salt. We paid $83 a ton for salt in the winter of 2019. And then $5,000 for anti-skid material, which the maintenance staff uses as needed. So a little 5-year history on our expenses here. So you can see if you go back to the winter of 15, we spent about $211,000. It actually dipped down a little bit in 16, but then in 17 and 18 increased again, and then up to $295,000 in 2019. And then this graph gives you the snowfall history, and I have to credit John Cups with providing this with me. I don't track the snowfall like he does, but you can see back in 2013, 137 inches, peak at 142 inches in 2017-18, but this year, only 87 inches. Okay? I'm told the resort is reporting 93 inches, Laurie, but 6 inches plus or minus. That 87 inches, though, included, I think John's calculations told me, 15 ice days, ice events. So that's where the money goes when we have to deal with ice. Not with the snow, right, but with the ice conditions. Security, right, our next biggest category. So the budget for that is $166,000, and that assumes 24/7, 365 days a year security coverage here. This is an example of a multi-year contract that we think really helped us. So on November 1 of 17, we entered into a 3-year contract for security services, and that included a 2% increase over the entire term. We also put that out for bid, and that was the best price, and this was the incumbent provider, so it's still the same security service. It also includes, you may see our security guys out walking around, they're kind of touching poles and things like that, so that's how we know if they're walking the property and checking things like they're supposed to. It includes the vehicle, so we were able to get rid of our vehicle several years ago. They have to provide it, so it's one less vehicle we have to take care of. And there's also GPS tracking, so if the office staff wants to know where the security folks are, we can find them. We can make sure that they're doing their job, number one, and number two, if we need to find them, we're able to locate them. Utilities, about $125,000 a year in utilities. Now that covers a lot of things. Okay, includes our trash removal is almost half of that. And that's another example of where we did lock in a 5-year contract, but the contract does allow the vendor to provide some increases, and they did put through an increase this year. This is the first time, I think we're in year 3 of the contract, and they notified us in early April of a 10% increase. So we're still working on that. We're going to try to get that down a little bit, but I was disappointed at the amount of it, but it was the first time within 3 years that they have raised it. That we also, very popular with the homeowners, was recycling, so we did add that. The utilities line also includes all of our water and sewage at our 2 buildings. Of course, we own 2 pools as well. It includes the electric and natural gas for those. We have street lights around the community, or what we call lamp posts, and those alone, right, $38,000 in electric. They're very expensive. That's the one electric bill that when I sign the checks every month, that's the one I just can't wrap my head around. It seems like a lot of money for electric for the lamp posts. But we are in the 3rd year of replacing all of the lamp posts around the property. So we probably won't see a lot of savings on the electric, but what we will see is the maintenance will go down. These are all LED bulbs, so you don't replace them as often. They're much more efficient. So I think that's where we're going to see some long-term savings. Plus, those lamp posts are metal. The old ones, as you probably know, are wood. They rot out. They need replaced. We expect these to last a lot longer. And we've also included in the budget the proposed rate increase on the, not proposed, can't say proposed anymore, the approved rate increase for water and sewage. So the remaining 20%, what does that cover? Well, the management company that we use, First Service Residential, we're on an annual contract with them. It was extended until June 30, 2020. And that costs us $71,500 a year, plus there are quarterly charges for printing statements, etc. So it works out to be about $75,500 a year. Our insurance, really two buckets of insurance. One is insuring the property, right? So property insurance, liability insurance, etc. That's the small part. That's about $16,000. The rest of it is workman's comp. So, and we are tied to the management company, so First Service passes through to us the billings for workman's comp insurance. So total insurance costs of about $53,000. Our office expenses, we obviously mail a lot of things. We have a newsletter. There are telephone costs, etc. So those are about $50,000 a year. We have a small fleet of vehicles. We have 4 trucks. We have an excavating machine. We have a machine called the Steiner that helps with snow removal. Plus we have a bunch of snow plows and things that we have to take care of. So the budget for that about $37,500 a year. Our activities, we have a great activities program here with our social and rec committees. We offer our summer program. We also have the shuttle service that we provide. So we add up the cost of all of that. It's about $73,000. And then the remainder, just a couple pages literally of things such as our bad debts, our depreciation, and contribution we make to the Bakersfield Fire Department, supplies, etc., about $154,000. So that gives you all of the $2.1 million in expenses. Now, we said we had revenues at 2.5, expenses at 2.1, so that leaves us with a difference, right? And that difference is going to go into our reserves. So our recommended reserve funding for the upcoming fiscal year, $410,000. We use an outside firm, okay, to perform what's called a reserve study. So we use Miller Dodson, and they came in the summer of 2017. And what they do is they walk the property, and they inspect all of the buildings, all of the facilities, all of the roads, etc. And they give us a detailed report. And they say, here's the current condition, and to maintain those things in the condition that they should be, not improve them, right? Just maintain the existing assets. Here's what it'll cost over the next 40 years. And then they say, well, what do you have in the bank? So they compare that to what we have in the bank, and they come up with a schedule of when the work should be done, and they give us a funding plan. So that's where that $410,000 recommendation comes from. Now, we also invest our money. Okay? So, and I always am very conservative when I do this estimate, but I estimate an investment earnings of about $30,000, and we pay our investment managers about $6,500. So net increase from investments of about $23,500. And I probably can't emphasize enough the importance of those reserves. If I go back to when my wife and I first moved into the community, we did not have a lot in reserves. In the community, it showed. We have made, I think, a lot of headway over the last 8 years, 7 years, with putting money away. And as an accountant, can't believe I'm saying this, we've spent money and it's been a good thing. Right? We spent a lot of money, right, to make the community look better and to improve it. And we're going to need to continue to do that. We're going to need to continue to invest in the community. So, one of the other things that I do is always try to look out, right? So I have to do a budget for this year that the board has to approve, but I'm also trying to project outward and see where do I think we're going to be. So over the next couple of years, so my proposed capital budget for this year is $730,000. That's a lot of money, right? And the next 2 years, $500,000 and then $276,000. We'll put $410,000 away each of those 3 years. Now you might be looking at those numbers and saying, Bob, what are you smoking? We're going to spend more than what we're putting away. And that is true, right? Especially the next 2 years. So we're going to draw down our reserves, okay? Planned, bring them down, and I'll show you where we're still going to be okay. We have a lot of work to continue to do. So the capital budget for fiscal 20, the proposal of $730,000, what does it include? Well, remember we said we're following the reserve study. Okay, so we're going to continue our work on the roads. We will be replacing the last phase of the light poles. We have some storage replacement. I think I made a typo there to fix that. Signage is what that's supposed to say. There's some signage around the property that needs replaced. We need a new utility vehicle. The current one has died and is no longer operational. Steps and handrails, and a major expense this year, we're going to have to do something with the salt dome. So if you drive down Gardner Road and if you go past the golf course and you look to your right, you'll see this structure there. and that's our salt dome. Now the reserve study only contemplates maintaining what you have, right? So it says for $15,000 you can replace the existing salt dome. The existing structure has a lot of problems, right? It's open on two sides. So we get wind in there, we get rain in there, right? We have a machine that we use to load salt, we can't adequately protect it. So the maintenance committee has been hard at work on this, and they've solicited a lot of information, and the current thinking is that we would upgrade that salt dome to get something that is covered on four sides. We won't be losing product due to weather, and we'll be able to keep our equipment inside as well to maintain it a little bit better. So that's our current estimate of that. There are also some other projects, right? And this is probably the biggest one. At the annual meeting, you'll recall that we talked about the need to do some work up at the South Ridge Center. The snack shack is not in compliance with state guidelines for a food operation. We also don't have any outdoor bathrooms or outdoor showers, also in violation of some Pennsylvania guidelines. So our best guesstimate, based on the information that we've received from our engineers and architects, is that to do the work that needs to be done there, we're looking at about $250,000. We have some major issues down on Imperial Road. This is an ongoing project, but we hope to fix it. We've done a lot of work on some engineering there and hope to start that process, and we're budgeting $40,000 to do that. And then there are a bunch of other little things, such as we need some new computers up in the office. Our current computer is about 4 to 5 years old. So things like that are what in the other category of $78,000. Now, I said I'd come back to how can we spend more than what we're putting into reserves, right? So this is a projection of where I think we'll be, right? So at the end of the upcoming fiscal year, fiscal 2020, I think we'll have about $1.5 million in the reserve fund, right? So is that good or bad? Well, I'm going to compare that to what did the reserve study tell us? The reserve study said, hey, you should have about $1,528,000. So guess what? We'll be about 98% funded. So I ran that out for the next 2 years, right? And if we follow that spending plan and if we follow the funding plan, we should be at about 108% at the end of 2021 and about 104% at the end of 2022. Right? So I think it all works, and it's the best estimate that I have as of right now. So if I was to pull it all together, right? I think key things to remember: a lot of planning and a lot of fiscal discipline and following our reserve study, it's paid off, right? It's really benefited the community. We have a lot of projects that we have completed, but we have a lot more work to do, so we'll continue to focus on that. And the good news is we do have the financial resources that we need to maintain the community. All right, so I'll stop here and field questions for a few minutes anyway. Yes, sir.
Yeah, well, I have two. I'll start with the first one. When you were talking about across-the-board increases,
Yes.
okay, that's usually my first yellow flag.
Okay.
You know, to do across-the-board, everybody needs to be getting the same services.
Okay.
The service I heard you talk about